and pack so much into 1 hour, it is time to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Chandra Ghosh Ippen, child psychologist and award-winning children's book author, who has a personal mission also to bake 1,000 pies during her lifetime and is now somewhere in the 500s. So Chandra is Associate Director of the Child Trauma Research Program at the University of California, San Francisco. She's a co-developer of Child Parent Psychotherapy, CPP, and a member of the Board of Directors of 0 to 3. And over the last 30 years, in addition to conducting research, clinical work, and training for childhood trauma, and publishing or co-authoring more than 20 publications, she's also written a number of children's books, and we're glad to dive into some of that today. I encourage our audience to share any reactions and questions as we go, and if we have a moment at the end, we can incorporate this into our conversation. But let me turn it over to you, Chandra, and give you as much time as we can.
Thank you, and I'm so glad I got to have a chance to see the video, because I'm imagining all of you in front of me. And I am honored to be able to read to the readers and to celebrate what you all do. So let's start with a story. The story that we're reading today is Holden Pot. Good day, my name is Mr. Holden Pot. I was taught that you got what you got. And when the heat is turned on hot, do not let it show. 'Cause all those feelings that start to bubble, they will surely cause you trouble, unless your lid is on real tight and you hold it on with all your might. Sadness, anger, I keep them inside, along with tears I never cried. At times I fear I'll overflow, but that's my way, it's what I know. Little Pot watched and tried to be brave. Little Pot listened and tried to behave. But there were so many things Little Pot never told, too many things for a Little Pot to hold. All by himself, pushed off a shelf, called dirty and dented by others who meant it. And all this made the stew thicken, lid quake and heartbeat quicken, body ache and belly sicken. Little Pot could not know what to do, so you know what he did? He blew. Then Little Pot felt ashamed and afraid he'd be in big trouble for the mess that he made. But this time was different, for when he blew, Holden Pot saw him, and Holden Pot knew. The rumbling volcano he'd learned to contain, he'd held for too long, that feeling of pain. So he went quickly, took Little Pot by the hand, held him real tight, and said, I understand, you're feeling alone, you're burning inside, but I am right here, I'm right by your side. And if you are hurting and needing to scream, let's open your lid and let off some steam. Let's turn down the heat so you don't feel so hot, for you are my precious, my loved Little Pot. And in the warmth of Holden's love and embrace, tears started dripping down Little Pot's face. Little Pot felt so loved and was now not alone, for in Holden Pot's arms, he found safety and home. Now, the other Pots watched and knew what is true, that Pots who tease need Holden too. So all of us big Pots, we know what to do. And I just want to thank you all for everything that you do every day. And watching that video really brought it home. And so let's think together about what people have been holding in. I know that that's something that we don't like to think about, but if we think about our bodies like pots, and we think about what is inside your pot and what does this do to you, and the idea that sometimes culturally we've been taught to lid it, it may be important to look inside, because what we're learning is that when you lid your pot, it affects your body. And that's what the science is telling us, the science of stress and trauma. You might have heard about the ACE study, is that when we've had difficult experiences in childhood, and as we have more of them, so does we often see more health problems, more heart disease, more forms of cancer, diabetes, because our bodies are under pressure. And so it's important that we think about what are all those things that might be in our pots. And if you want, you can put things in the chat that you know that families are holding, that children are holding. So we know that many families need food. We know that people have been under pressure as they work kind of heroically to support our communities around COVID. We know that each of us has been missing people, our loved ones, and that there are also financial worries. And we know that these are different sources of danger, and that sometimes we're even at odds with one another because we are each feeling different dangers differently. And, thinking about illness and loss as well. And then we know that children, there's been a lot of stress trying to learn through the internet, trying to have your parents support you, thinking about how there sometimes increases in conflict in families as your parents are juggling, not being able to do the things that you wanted to do. And unfortunately, we also have seen a rise in conflict among adults. This being very understandable when you're squeezed from the outside. And so all of this goes into our pots. And what we want to think about is, where do you have a chance to breathe? And so as we look at this picture, I want you to think about what this person, what you are doing is so much more than reading. That you are creating safe spaces where children are breathing, where they are connecting, as Dr. Jarvis said, that it is in those magic of those small connections, right? And that there is so much more happening here. And I wanted to share one of my favorite concepts from infant mental health, which is the concept of the protective shield. And this idea that little children believe in some ways that grown-ups are bigger, wiser, stronger kind, that we're all powerful. And if you look at that picture, the two-headed monster is meant to represent danger. And this idea of when there is danger, there is a grown-up who's got you. And that's what allows you to actually grow and thrive and learn, because your grown-ups have got you, it's safe to go out into the world. It's safe to explore. It's safe to try new things, right? Because you have a grown-up, because if there is danger, your grown-up has got you. They'll pull you back in and they'll keep you safe. Now, I want to just go back to this. I think I wasn't covering this, but when we think about all of these stressors, a lot of these stressors are stressors that affect the grown-ups. And what we know is that little kids, they're sponges. And so part of what they put into their pot is our stress. And it's not like, we don't want to share our stress, but I think of them as spongy for emotions and spongy for danger. And so it's so wise of them to think it's important to me to know if my grown-up is doing okay, because if my grown-up is not doing okay, then I'm not doing okay. Right? And so all of those sources of stress that are both directly experienced by the child, as well as indirectly experienced because of their proximity to loved ones who are very understandably going through stress, that creates that. And so that's inside them. And so you think about how, as you're going through this, for some children, because their grown-ups have been having challenges or because there's been danger in the community, they haven't felt like their grown-ups always have them. And that's really hard, that there is this absence of protection. And sometimes it's a real absence because we know that some grown-ups have some significant challenges. And sometimes it's that the child perceives the absence even when the grown-up is there. And as you look at this picture, I just want you to think about the difference between fear with connection and protection and fear without protection and connection. Because when you look at that, we want to think about, if you are the small child in this image, how do you survive? And this is really kind of understanding what danger does to us. This is understanding when we talk about stress and trauma, we're really talking about what do you do in the face of danger and how the body remembers danger and is sensitive to danger. And what we might see is that some of the patterns of adaptation are things that we might actually call behavior problems. And so one of the ways that you survive, for example, is to think about, I need to fight this thing. And I want to just sort of share, these are images from a different book, but how animals can help us understand stress response patterns. So one way of fighting might be to sort of bark and growl, like, get away from me. Another way might be to be really stinky. I'm going to spray like skunk. I'm going to be really kind of repulsive in some ways and push you away. Now, if I can't fight, maybe if I'm looking at this thing, maybe I need to run. And can you see how rabbit is sort of the symbol of the runner, the very active kid who needs to move and get away? And then another way of running is to turtle up, that I'm actually running away, but by withdrawing, right? And then what we might see is that, oh, and if I can't do that, if I can't fight or run, maybe I fall down flat, maybe I freeze, maybe I help myself by not being in my body, by not being present. Or maybe I avoid. And that's elephant, not wanting to talk about it or see it. Or maybe what I need to do is monkey is sort of the little creature who reminds us that they might cling to a new adult who comes through and just say, I need to go with you. Will you help me? Or they might try to make nice with this. And in making nice with this creature, they might kind of not be attending to their own needs sometimes because they're always tiptoeing on eggshells. And then we can think about frog. Frog teaches us that some kids actually, in the face of danger, what happens is they lose their voice. You know, like you got a frog in your throat, but they show delays in their development because stress, as Dr. Jarvis showed us, affects your neurons, right? And so this idea that when I'm really stressed, stress can affect the skill that I'm using. It can also affect the grownups around me who are responsible for that beautiful serve and return that helps you develop. And so we can see these changes. And so just remembering in a way that our overarching goal is to regrow the protective shield and to help children to see grownups as bigger, wiser, stronger kind. And to really, every time they're interacting with you, they're forming a template of this is how most grownups are. And so the words from Jerry Paul and Maria St. John of how you are is as important as what you do. And that this relational magic that you're creating as you read books is that you're the magic. And so as we look at this picture, we think about what are children learning when they're sitting with you. And what they're learning is I am safe here. What they're learning is I am lovable. I am worthy of care. And these are messages that we want all children to have. And unfortunately, for some children, these are not their standard messages. And then very importantly, as you are helping them to read at their own speed, wherever it is, what they're learning is I am capable. I am capable of being with someone. I am capable of flipping pages. I am capable of seeing, talking about a book. I am capable about noticing a letter. And what's really important is that often trauma robs people of their sense of competence and capacity, right? Because when you are in danger, often it's the idea that I couldn't do anything, I couldn't stop it. And so having moments where you feel capable and connected, that is the antidote. And so just really thinking about this is a safe base for learning, a safe base for exploration, and holding that they're learning so much than reading, much more than reading skills, in addition to the very important reading skills. And I think we can also think about books providing opportunities. What you read often is important. So clearly books open the door to joy and to imagination and to connection. And some books show children, I'm not the only one. And I love the little boy who said, I love seeing books about Black people, Martin Luther King, right? I see myself in these books and I see the strengths of my people. And I understand that and I connect to that. I'm not the only one with these strengths, with this voice. I'm also not the only one with these struggles. And then they can also see, for some books talk about struggles, like seeing a book where a child tantrums. I'm not the only one who tantrums. Oh my goodness, I'm not the only one with hard feelings inside. I'm not stranded. So this idea of fear without connection or fear with this beautiful connection and protection. And I've got a grown-up who's saying that there's nothing wrong with this little pot that's blowing up or this kid that's blowing up, that we all feel that way sometimes. Because let's be honest, with COVID, like if we had a show of hands, how many of us have not wanted to have our temper tantrums? We have definitely wanted to. And so being able to really be validated in that of, yes, we don't want to get all messy, but yes, there are lots of things that we're holding in and we sometimes feel like blowing our lids too. And that you can talk about these things, right? How critical it is to think about that. And these are words from Dan Siegel, who you can YouTube, but this idea of what is shareable is bearable. Right? And so what we want is for children, they have stories inside them. So we read stories, but you all know that they have stories. We all have stories inside us. And sometimes in these magic moments, they share them with you. And even when these stories are hard to hear, because you wish they didn't have those experiences, I want you to hold them like pearls and think, this is a child who has trusted me with the hard things. And that what you do is simply by bearing witness, simply by holding it, you are helping them to see that they're not alone. You are giving them fear with protection, fear with connection. You are letting them know that these things can be spoken, and that is glorious. It's still hard to hear it, and so we all need support as we hear this, but to know that a child is not stranded because that story was inside them no matter what. And what we see is that when it hits the light of day, when it's not stuck in their pot, development thrives. And so another thing that we might hold is that Dan Siegel says that we name it to tame it. And so talking about our feelings, this idea that in early childhood, we often don't know, like, this is frustration, this is rage, this is righteous anger, this is sadness. What we know is this is the way my body feels. It feels really icky. And so having somebody accompany you on this journey is really key. And to know that you don't have to hold it in and that the antidote is to be held in your feelings. So as we think about books that can open doors to conversation, I wanted to share some free resources. And so this is a free disaster series that we developed. And unfortunately, I know that Florida is often affected by hurricanes. And so there is a version for hurricanes and for COVID, and just for you all to develop jointly with the National Child Traumatic Stress Network to know about this resource, where you meet a couple of little friends, Trinka and Sam, and you learn about the disaster and how it affected them. And, just thinking about the hurricane, and just think about this as stories opening a door, right? So that children might diverge from the book, and that's great, because where they're going is to where they need to go. It's not about getting through a book, it's getting into a story. And that in the stories, we actually see the little reactions of the little creatures, which is also like, oh, they're not behaving in ideal ways, but they're behaving in very understandable ways. They're not sleeping well, they're kind of pissed off. And then very beautifully, we see how grown-ups, how their parents support them, how they get cuddles, how they move to get the icky out, how they talk about what they went through, right? And then we see lovingly how the community comes together. And so we just wanted children to have a coloring book and communities to have a free coloring book that they could use to start conversations. And there's a parent guide in the back, so that we can have books also that show children that when there are hard times, we come together. When there are hard times, you're not alone, and that you can talk about these hard times. Now, as you're reading the books, I think it's very important that you understand a couple of core trauma concepts. And this is one that I really hold, which is the idea of reminders. And so if you think about, a hurricane or something, there are often things long after the hurricane has ended that remind you of the hurricane, right? Like when you get sort of windy weather, and that you can notice your body amping up, right? And just think about these things remind you of danger. And your body amping up is your body's wisdom, because what your body is saying is danger is coming, get ready. And yet it's very inconvenient if there isn't danger, because then we're freaking out and we're often behaving very poorly. And so I often use the metaphor of pollen. And so just thinking about trauma, and if you think about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a lot like asthma, where you don't cure asthma, you manage it. And so if you are working with a child or a person or yourself and you've experienced danger, what you want to honor is that there may be things in the environment that act as pollen. And when you're exposed to pollen, you might turn to your stress response pattern. So you might be like turtle in, turtle up. I didn't even talk about squirrel, which is funny because I am squirrel. Squirrel chatters endlessly about things. You might just sort of start talking endlessly about things, or eat a lot of nuts. That's me too. It's not nuts, it's chocolate. But you just might notice that you go into your stress response pattern when you hit pollen. And so we want to be thinking, what is the pollen for a child? And unfortunately, I want to tell you that pollen sometimes shows up in books. So I wanted you to know this. So here's a little example about a lovely little story about a bear. But what if you're sitting with a child and the child thinks, oh, my daddy gave me a teddy bear. And then the child's mind jumps to, my daddy is not with us, I miss him. What you might notice is that the book has become a reminder. And in this case, it's a reminder of loss, of my daddy's not with us. And so you might see an affective shift in the child, where some kids, they're like rabbit and they move around a lot. Other kids, they're like dog, and all of a sudden they become kind of obnoxious. And you're like, what's going on? Why are they being like this? And for some children also, what happens is as they think about this, my daddy's not with us, they might remember that there was conflict in the home, that things were scary. And then the book might actually carry a trauma reminder, which might mean that you start to see more and more behavior. Now, what I would say is there's nothing wrong with the book. This is going to happen. And different children, because of their experience, different things in different books might trigger them. So for some children, it's just actually seeing a family because their family has had problems. Might be seeing a grandparent who might have passed from COVID. I just want you to be aware of this. It's hard because if you notice that as you're reading and a child needs to shift and move away, honor the body's wisdom. And think about, I don't know what's in this book, but maybe this kid does need to wiggle. And how do we go back to that relationship and think, here you are safe to wiggle? And how might you understand? I often, in our training of child parent psychotherapists, I use these metaphors. So I think about our bodies as cups, and when your cup gets full And when your cup gets full, you need to regulate, right? And if you look at the thermometer below, some people, when their cup gets full, it's like they get fried and they sort of tilt over and it's sort of overwhelming. And other people, to protect them, their body numbs out. They go into the blue zone. And so just watching what happens to this person. And if their cup gets full, children often try to do things to regulate. They try to move, they try to snuggle, they might try to do a different activity. And we want to be aware of that. And then sometimes they come back to the book, but more in terms of looking at it. And they might even talk about what's in it. Like some kids, you might have noticed that if you have a book with an angry face, they just don't like that angry face. And then that dialogue would be around, oh, you don't like it when people get mad. Right. And, we might think about how, yeah, it's hard. We all get mad sometimes, but sometimes we don't like it because it has been scary. So just holding this, and I really wanted to honor your role in what you do, and that you are really helping children to see that they're not alone, and that we're honoring when we can help their parents as well. I loved watching the video and seeing parents also say the joy that ReadingPals gave to them, because they can also see that their child is growing and thriving, and that their child runs home and shares and says, look what I did today. And what they're getting a sense of also, especially when the danger is really big, it's not sufficient that it just be the parent alone with a protective shield. When there's a really big danger, like with COVID or with other things, what families really need to know is that there's a shield in front of them, and that shield is work, neighborhood, school, and ReadingPals. Just think about how we give a moment of peace and respite to the family, how we give a growing competence to the family when you do these things. And that this also, as we think about funding and policies for this is society. This is our culture, our policies, where we say, we got you, right? So if we can say, we've got you, school, we've got you, teachers, we know you're stressed. We're giving you a moment of peace where we're part of your team in building competence, peace, and relationship. And that is glorious. And that trickles down to the family and to the child. And so I just wanted to thank all of you who are ReadingPals. I'm here if you have questions, but just really wanted to celebrate 10 years and hope to celebrate more in the future. So thank you all. And there are some resources. There's a free webinar if you want to dive deeper into thinking about stress and trauma. Y también para todos los que hablan español, muchísimas gracias. También el seminario de web también está en español. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chandra. I'm seeing a lot of affirmations in the chat that this is definitely resonating. And I know for me as a mother, as a ReadingPals volunteer, as a friend, as a human, it's so important to have these reminders of, it's one thing to read Holden Pot, and as adults, we can see the message that's coming, but it's another thing to look at a beloved book like Corduroy and take a moment to think about what may come up, and just the images you have given all of us to think about. My body feels icky. You sense that, but how do you name it? And what is our role as volunteers to learn how to react to some of these things and how to be part of that protective shield and understand that. And I think a couple of other images I'm leaving with are this idea of holding as pearls the nuggets that may not be so nice, that the stories that a child shares, and sort of reframing that. Really important. And also the importance of diversity. Appreciate that your resources are available in Spanish, also really important in our state. I know in your state too, but just I see the strengths of my people, you said, and it's important, the role that we all play in that. And then of course the pollen. And so we have just a couple of minutes left, and I'm not seeing any particular questions about the presentation. So just take a moment to thank you again for being with us. I'm sure through your website you may get some comments and questions later, and you may see an uptick in traffic as all of us here take a look at those resources.